Right, so I'm in the my Suzuki SX4 manual. Can't be good. There is a horrendous noise coming from what sounds like one of the accessories, something driven by the serpentine belt, it sounds like. I'll let you hear it shortly, but I think it's actually coming from the water pump. I think the bearing or the bushing in the water pump, the drive shaft is gone. I think. I'm not 100% sure. I'm a wee bit concerned because it looks like a lot of grief to change this according to the manual. However, I don't really plan on changing that entire assembly. You can see there in the manual it shows you the entire pump housing. The thermostat is shown there as well, of course, and the way it's bolted on the side of the block. Well, I'm hoping I can get away with not actually doing that and actually just change the, if you look at the actual part, when I've been on some of the parts websites, it actually just shows you the front face of the pump. So the flange that actually bolts to the pump body itself, housing the impeller, of course, and the drive shaft to the actual pulley assembly. I'm hoping that's the case, but I'm not even certain it's actually the pump yet. So let's go out and take a look. This is actually a better view. I should have showed you this. That's what I'm hoping I can actually change. Just that actual portion, the casting actually bolts to the housing itself. That casting there, of course, is the actual pump itself. The impeller is within that casting. You can see the flange for the pulley. Of course, the drive shaft, as I say, goes through there. So I'm hoping I can get away with just changing that. It looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts maybe. Maybe easier said than done. Let's find out. Okay, so I'm sitting inside the car here, obviously. I'll start it up so you can hear the noise, and then I'll take you outside and wow, what a racket. Can you hear that? I don't know how well the mic's picking it up, but we'll take you outside so you can hear it a wee bit better. There's the water pump pulley right there. And it sounds like it's coming from that general area. It's hard to tell. You see a little squirt to see if it wants to quiet down. Okay, so the idea is we'll just give it a little shot of lubricant here and see if we can get it to quiet down at all. Hopefully it won't be in here. Not really any change at all. Let me give it another shot. Alright. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree here. Hang on. Okay. So, it's not the water pump. This is the idler pulley. The bearing should sit inside here. You notice a distinct absence of something? I put my stethoscope. This is extremely handy to have if you're ever trying to troubleshoot a noise that's emanating from anywhere in the engine bay. Try and get yourself a stethoscope. Extremely useful. I was able to localize the noise that was actually coming from the idler pulley and the bearing here. Now, some of you who know anything about looking after cars, or especially the SX4, you know that this is a failure prone area, and this is quite often a source of some noise or vibration. And anybody who's watched my video that I've had in the past for actually replacing this bearing actually knows that I've dealt with this in the past. This little idler pulley has actually caused me no end of grief. And let me show you something. If I can dig it out here. Yeah. Right, there it is. This is now the third time I'm revisiting this issue, and it is getting on my nerves. It has been a pain in the frick that is really starting to aggravate me. So the first time that this failed, the car, my car here has got, this is my wife's car actually, it's got 240,000 kilometers on it. Now, is it a surprise that a bearing fails at 240,000 kilometers? Absolutely not. So I got myself a replacement bearing and I actually pressed it in. A month later, I start to get some noise emanating from roughly the same area. I take the idler pulley out, I spin the bearing's starting to bind. Well, I've got two SX4s, so I actually bought myself a second bearing. And you'll notice on here that says SX4 idler pulley. Used, very low kilometers. That's because this bearing that's in this package is the first one that I actually put in here. I'd say the car maybe, it got a month's worth of use, maybe a couple of thousand kilometers. It started to emanate some noise. And so I went back, took a look at the idler pulley. Sure enough, starts to feel like it's binding up. This is the bearing. It's actually inside this package. And I think, okay, I guess I got a bad bearing. Well, no, it's another month and a half later. I think I made that video in August or September, maybe October at the latest. And it's gone again to the point where it actually was making so much noise. The bearing actually exploded on my way to the parts department to get myself a new idler pulley. Because I'm sick of this. And I'm not putting up with these cheap Chinese bearings anymore. I decided just to buy myself a new idler pulley. And here it is, right? So there's the part number. Again, this is a 2-liter air-conditioned idler pulley. I'm pretty sure they would likely be the same, but I don't know that as for a fact, so I'll just tell you the specs on my vehicle. Sorry, 1 second while I get this out. Same idler pulley. Exact same. So I'm just going to change the idler pulley this time. Again, I'll show you the part number. There's the part number. It's a Draco. Problem is, right there, you cannot get away from it. So, anyway, moral of the story. When I actually made my original video that I've since pulled down because I don't want anybody going through the same grief. Is it worth it to cheap out? You know, I could have got a better quality bearing for maybe $10 or $20 more, a couple of quid, a couple of euro extra if you're in that market. This costs next to nothing, and I should have known better. I should have known better. How many times have I seen this movie where I cheap out on something and end up with just grief after the fact? Now this bearing exploded and let go just basically outside my driveway. So fortunately, I could just puppy the car back home, and surprisingly, I don't know how it didn't destroy anything when it threw the belt, but it didn't. And of course, anybody who knows these cars knows that, you know, yeah, I can live with it, the alternator for a few kilometers. I can live with it, I can live with it even with the power assist, and I certainly don't need my air conditioning in December in Canada. However, how long do you think you could drive your car for with the water pump actually operating? So, all for the sake of me cheaping out, and I'm pissed with myself because I should have known better. Cheaping out on this junk bearing, I've given myself this grief again. Now, I'm happy that this is actually the bottom of my grief. I know that this is where the noise is coming from. I don't need to deal with my water pump. I'm happy. But the point and the moral of the story is, when is it ever worth it to cheap out? When is it ever worth it? I don't know. I'm starting to think it's never worth it. If you've got an option for a better bearing, take it. That would be my advice. I know I'm going to try and stick to that. I mean, we're all under a budget. We all try to make things work economically. But look at the ongoing cost. Look at the grief that this could have cost if this had to let go, you know, God knows where, right? My wife and kids travel in this car. If that had to let go on the highway or something, it could have been, God knows, I shudder to think what could have happened. Yeah, you don't lose the steering, but you lose your power steering assist. That ever happened to you? That happened to me decades ago. One time, a car I was driving in through a belt, and if you're not ready for it, it's not pleasant. So, moral of the story is don't cheap out, don't buy them bearings. I can tell you that much. And yeah, if and when you've got grief with your idler pulley, perhaps this is a better alternative. Save yourself the aggravation, and just replace the whole pulley assembly. As I said, I'm hoping this is not going to come to grief again later on. How do you get away from it in this day and age? You don't. Anyway, so that'll be the end of it. I'll install this. I've got one other thing to show you before I wrap this video up, and we'll call it a day. Okay, so we're underneath the car here. The plastic's removed on the front end of the engine. There's the stud, the idler pulley, not to be confused with the belt tensioner pulley. That's strictly the idler pulley. Actually mounts to the actual to the block on. It's just a stud. The problem is, if you have the air conditioning model, you'll see right next to it, there's actually an air conditioning line, a refrigerant line that actually is extremely close in proximity to the stud itself, and you can't actually get the idler pulley on because of the close tolerance of the parts here. There's not enough room to slip it over to get the bearing and the pulley situated on the stud. So let me come back up top here for a second. So what I use is actually pickle fork, and you can see here I'm at the front engine mount. Place a pickle fork or any other lever, suitable lever you've got actually between the engine mount and the casting there for itself, and you can actually, there's enough give in the mount that you can actually lever it. I don't know if you can actually see the movement there, but you can put a Johnson bar on this to get even more leverage on it. You get just enough movement to the rear of the engine towards the transaxle side that you can actually slip the bearing over the stud. It makes a big difference and makes things easier. Otherwise you're in a bunch of grief trying to move that refrigerant line, and you don't need that aggravation. So just a wee trick you might want to use. Right, we'll call it a day. Cheers. Okay, well, just one other point I should mention. Some cynics in the audience might be thinking, well, you damaged the bearing, of course, when you press the N. That's why you're having all this grief. Well, I don't pretend to be the sharpest tech in the shed. I mean, I'm just an amateur mechanic. I'm certainly no expert. But how do you go wrong with this? You know, I used the old bearing to press in the new bearing that I put in there. From this side, of course, that's the outer race that's actually still in there. And I used the old one to press this in so that I'm not imposing any force on the actual balls themselves. I was always taught that, you know, if there's a friction fit on the outside race, you press the outside race. If there's a shaft that goes through and the friction fit is on the inside, then you press on the inside. So that's the case with the bearing. I don't see how I could go wrong there. Perhaps it did. As I said, I'm no expert. Here's, if the balls are in situ, if you can imagine, there's a spacer that goes on the inside, and when you fasten it to the stud, this nut doesn't actually contact the bearing, only the spacer. So there's no load placed on that either. So how do you go wrong? I don't know. And yet things still do go wrong. I guess it's the second law of thermodynamics in action, I guess, huh? Okay, we'll leave it at that. Right, cheers.